Imagine being trapped on a wooden ship in the middle of the ocean, thousands of miles away from land, the horizon stretching endlessly in every direction. The sails are full, the crew is busy, and yet, beneath the surface of this adventure lies a slow and terrifying enemy. Men begin to feel weak. Their gums bleed when they bite into stale bread, old wounds reopen for no reason, and their teeth start falling out. What kind of invisible curse could do this? It wasn't the storm, nor the cannon fire of enemy ships. It was something far more ordinary, yet deadly: scurvy, a disease so simple in its cause, yet so devastating in its effect, that entire voyages were brought to their knees because of it. And yet, in the shadowy world of pirates, men who had no formal medicine, no Royal Navy doctors, and no organized supply lines, found ways to fight back with remedies so simple that they seem almost laughable today. But these remedies worked. They saved lives. And they reveal a fascinating truth about how desperate men, pushed to the edge of survival, used instinct, tradition, and trial and error to outsmart death itself. To understand how pirates dealt with scurvy, you first need to imagine the conditions of life at sea. Food was preserved in the simplest, roughest ways: salted meat, hard biscuits that could last months, dried beans if you were lucky, and barrels of water that often turned green after a few weeks. Fresh fruit and vegetables disappeared quickly after a voyage began. On the first days, you might still eat an onion or an apple. But by the second month, it was nothing but dried, salted, and stinking rations. And scurvy would creep in. The disease could kill up to half the crew on long journeys. Think about that. Not in battle, not in storms, but quietly, invisibly, one man at a time, until a ship full of sailors became a floating graveyard. So what did pirates do differently? Why did some crews manage to avoid the worst, while others wasted away? Pirates lived outside the law, but that also meant they weren't chained to the strict rules of Navy rations. They took what they wanted, and they experimented. They learned fast. A pirate captain who lost half his crew to scurvy wasn't feared, wasn't followed, and wasn't alive for long. Survival forced them to pay attention to what worked and to pass down the knowledge. Some of the most effective pirate remedies were not medical discoveries in the modern sense, but rather folk practices borrowed from different cultures. Citrus fruits were the most obvious cure, though few people in the 17th century understood why. Lemons, limes, and oranges, when available, could turn a dying sailor into a healthy man within days. But here's the twist. Pirates were far more likely to encounter citrus than Navy ships were. Why? Because pirates often raided coastal settlements in the Caribbean, Central America, and Africa. In these places, fruit grew wild or was cultivated by locals. Pirates plundered not just gold and rum, but food. They stocked their holds with whatever they could get their hands on. And in doing so, they accidentally brought back the one ingredient that could save them. Imagine the scene. A crew, weakened and desperate, docks at a small island to refill their water. They find groves of bitter oranges. The fruit tastes sour, harsh even, but when they eat it, within days their bleeding gums heal, their strength returns, their spirits rise. The crew doesn't know about vitamin C because the concept wouldn't exist for another 200 years. All they know is that citrus keeps them alive. And from then on, they never forget to grab as much as they can whenever they raid a port or a plantation. But citrus wasn't always available. Pirates roamed wide, and sometimes months passed without the chance to plunder fresh fruit. So what then? This is where the story becomes even more fascinating. Pirates learned from indigenous peoples, from enslaved Africans, from travelers who carried oral traditions across oceans. One simple but surprisingly effective remedy was to drink infusions made from pine needles. In North America, native tribes brewed pine needle tea to survive harsh winters, rich in vitamin C without them knowing the chemical reason. Pirates who ventured along the eastern seaboard picked up the practice. The drink was sharp, resinous, but life-giving. It's one of those forgotten tricks of survival that modern science later confirmed. Another improvised remedy came from fermented foods. Sauerkraut, pickled vegetables, anything that could preserve nutrients became a weapon against scurvy. In some cases, pirates took barrels of sauerkraut from captured European ships, not realizing that the sour cabbage was more than just a change of taste. It was packed with vitamin C that had survived fermentation. It was tangy, it was strange, but it kept men alive on voyages where nothing else fresh could last. And then there were onions and garlic. These were prized by pirates, not just for flavor, but because crews noticed that ships carrying onions seemed to lose fewer men. Onions were easy to store for weeks, sometimes months, before spoiling, and they carried enough vitamin C to make a difference. Garlic became a staple, used in stews and broths, passed down as a cure-all for everything from infections to weakness. Was it perfect? No, but compared to eating nothing but salted pork and hard biscuits, it was life-saving. Think of the contrast here, the Royal Navy. With its strict discipline and slow-moving bureaucracy, often clung to tradition and ignored sailors' complaints. Meanwhile, pirates, who were outcasts, criminals, and rebels, were ironically more flexible and open to trying anything that might help. In this sense, piracy wasn't just about breaking laws, it was about breaking rules of survival. Pirates lived closer to chaos, and chaos forced them to innovate. But there is another layer to this story. Remedies were not only about physical survival, they also carried psychological power. Imagine a ship where men were wasting away, morale sinking as fast as their strength. Now, imagine a captain producing a barrel of strange sour fruit, or a pot of bitter tea that, within days, begins to revive the dying. To the crew, it would have seemed almost magical. This gave captains authority, built trust, and reinforced the idea that their leader had secret knowledge. In a world without medicine, the line between doctor and magician was thin. And on pirate ships, this blurred line could keep discipline intact when everything else was falling apart. But here's the haunting part. Not every pirate captain cared. Some hoarded citrus for themselves, keeping the precious fruit hidden while their men collapsed. Others dismissed remedies as superstition until it was too late. In those moments, the pirate codeware crews could vote to remove a captain came into play. Men who felt betrayed by leaders who ignored their suffering sometimes mutinied. And scurvy wasn't just a disease of the body, it was a disease that exposed the fragile trust holding pirate crews together. Even stranger are the stories of pirates who tried remedies that sound absurd to us today. Some believed that drinking seawater in small amounts could flush out the disease. Others chewed on tar or leather, desperate to find relief. There were experiments with vinegar, with beer made from spruce needles, with whatever the ocean or the stolen cargo provided. Some of these attempts failed miserably, others worked by accident. But the common thread was this: pirates didn't sit still and die. They fought back, sometimes blindly, but always with a stubborn refusal to let scurvy take them without resistance. Now pause for a moment and think, isn't it remarkable that men with no science, no laboratories, no doctors, still stumbled onto solutions that modern medicine confirms today? Citrus fruit, fermented vegetables, onions, garlic, pine needles, all of these contain the very vitamin C that was missing from their diets. They didn't know the molecule. They didn't need to. They only needed to survive. And yet, this survival had limits. Remedies were inconsistent. Supplies ran out, and not every pirate ship was lucky enough to find what it needed. Some voyages ended in disaster, skeleton crews limping back to port with barely enough men to sail. The ocean was unforgiving, and even the boldest remedies couldn't always win against months of deprivation. That tension, the line between ingenuity and tragedy, is what makes the story of pirates and scurvy so human, so vivid. It's not just about medical history. It's about desperation, courage, betrayal, and survival at the edge of the known world. When we think of pirates, we imagine cannons, treasure, and rum. But rum itself, strangely enough, played a role in the battle against scurvy, not in the way you might expect. On its own, rum offered no protection at all. It was just alcohol, a way to dull pain and keep spirits high. But pirates rarely drank rum plain. They mixed it with water, lime juice, or whatever sour fruit they could find, creating what sailors later called grog. The lime juice wasn't added because pirates understood chemistry. It was added because the sourness masked the taste of stale, rotten water, making it more drinkable. Yet in that act, without realizing it, pirates were dosing themselves with vitamin C, a survival hack born out of the need to choke down foul water turned into one of the simplest remedies against scurvy. It's almost ironic. The very drink associated with pirate debauchery, rum mixed with lime, was in fact a quiet shield against death. And here's the twist. When the British Navy finally adopted lime juice as a mandatory ration in the 18th century, it was essentially catching up to what pirates had been doing out of desperation for decades. Pirates, driven by necessity, were ahead of their time. But remedies weren't just about food and drink. Some pirates believed in using plants and herbs gathered from islands they visited. Imagine a landing party sent ashore, not just to hunt pigs or gather coconuts, but to forage for leaves, roots, and berries recommended by locals. Many Caribbean islands had a rich herbal tradition, a blending of indigenous knowledge and African practices brought over through slavery. Pirates, with no shame in stealing more than just gold, often borrowed these remedies. A tea made from guava leaves, for example, could ease stomach problems and provide nutrients. A stew of cassava mixed with greens brought energy. Even chewing raw sugarcane gave a small dose of nutrients that helped slow the disease. And yet, even with these tricks, scurvy remained a shadow over every voyage. Picture a ship at sea for 3 months, the men restless, their bodies weakening. Every bite of hardtack cracked teeth already loosened by bleeding gums. The smell of sickness hung in the air. A crew like this was vulnerable, not just to the disease itself, but to despair. Morale was as important as medicine. A hopeless crew could turn on itself, slipping into mutiny or depression. This is why remedies, however small, carried such weight. A barrel of sour oranges or a pot of pine, needle brew didn't just heal bodies, it revived hope. Let's pause on that thought, hope. Because in the cutthroat world of piracy, where violence and greed ruled, hope might seem out of place. But think about it. A pirate ship was a fragile democracy, run on agreements and trust as much as fear. If men believed their captain could keep them alive even against invisible killers like Scurvy, they stayed loyal. If not, they replaced him. Remedies, in this sense, weren't just survival, they were politics. There are records of pirates who gained reputations not just for bravery in battle, but for their uncanny ability to keep their crews healthy. These men were whispered about like sorcerers. Others failed spectacularly. A captain who ignored the signs of scurvy or who hoarded fruit for himself often faced rebellion. This wasn't a navy with rigid hierarchy. Pirates voted. Pirates mutinied. And in the face of scurvy, the balance of power could shift overnight. But what's even more intriguing is how pirates' remedies spread beyond their own world. Merchant sailors, captives, even prisoners who escaped pirate ships sometimes carried these lessons home. Knowledge traveled not through books, but through scars and memories. A sailor who had seen men recover after drinking lime-infused rum might whisper the trick in a tavern years later. Over time, bits of pirate survival became sailor folklore, and folklore eventually became official naval policy. Pirates, in their lawless way, were accidental teachers. Yet, the fight against scurvy was never guaranteed. The ocean was vast, supplies limited, and luck mattered as much as knowledge. There are haunting tales of ships where remedies ran out too soon. Crews who had tasted survival with citrus or sauerkraut, only to watch their last stores spoil or get stolen. Imagine the crushing despair, knowing the cure existed, knowing it worked, but being unable to reach it. In those moments, scurvy was not just a disease, it was torture. And sometimes desperation led to madness. There are scattered stories of pirates trying bizarre remedies born of sheer panic. Men chewed on ropes soaked with salt water, believing the brine would purify their blood. Others tried drinking animal blood when hunting pigs or goats on islands, convinced it held some life force. Some even believed scurvy was caused by laziness of the body, so they forced the sick to run on deck or exercise, only worsening their suffering. These moments show the darker side of survival, the lengths to which humans will go when the line between life and death blurs. Still, for every tragic attempt, there were victories. A pirate ship that stumbled across a plantation of limes might be reborn within days. Sailors who could barely stand suddenly found the strength to work, to sing, to fight again. It must have felt like resurrection, a miracle pulled straight from the earth. And in that miracle lay a deeper truth, that nature, not treasure, was often the most valuable prize a pirate could capture. Consider this: gold could buy power, but without health, it was useless. A chest of silver meant nothing to a man whose teeth fell out and whose legs gave way beneath him. But a crate of lemons? That could mean the difference between returning from a voyage with riches or not returning at all. In a strange way, the true hidden treasure of the seas was not buried on islands, but hanging from trees, waiting to be plucked. What makes the story of pirates and scurvy even more gripping is the contrast with the great empires of the time. Spain, Britain, France, all of them lost countless sailors to the disease. Whole expeditions failed, not because of enemy cannons, but because of bleeding gums and rotting flesh. And yet, the pirates, those despised outlaws, sometimes managed better, simply because they were freer to adapt. The empires clung to tradition, while pirates clung to survival. It's a lesson that echoes beyond history. Flexibility often beats rigidity when survival is at stake. But even with remedies, scurvy remained a constant test. A crew might survive one voyage, only to face it again on the next. The fight never truly ended because the ocean never offered certainty. That lingering threat shaped pirate culture in subtle ways. It made men more willing to risk everything for quick raids rather than long campaigns. It made them value short bursts of plunder over slow strategies. Scurvy was the clock ticking in the background, reminding every pirate that time was against them. And so, remedies were not just tools of healing, they were symbols of borrowed time. A lime bought a week. A pot of sauerkraut bought a month. But the disease always waited, always returned. The ocean itself seemed to whisper, "You can fight me, but you will never win forever." Imagine the moment when a pirate ship captured a prize on the high seas. The cannons fired, the muskets cracked, and after a furious battle, the enemy surrendered. The crew rushed to plunder the ship's hold, searching for gold, silver, or rum. But among the loot, the real treasures sometimes looked far less glamorous. Barrels of pickled cabbage, crates of onions, sacks of dried citrus. To the untrained eye, this was mundane cargo. To a crew haunted by the memory of scurvy, it was salvation. Pirates knew the signs all too well: the hollowed cheeks, the bleeding gums, the smell of rotting flesh. They knew how quickly it could spread. And so, amid the chaos of plunder, food with even the faintest chance of staving off the disease was guarded as fiercely as coins. It's strange to think about. In a world obsessed with treasure, survival often hinged on vegetables. A pirate might risk his life in a sword fight, not just for gold, but for a barrel of sauerkraut that could mean life or death for his mates. And this raises a haunting question. How many men in history died clutching their chests over treasure, when all they really needed was something as simple as a lemon? But there's another dimension to this story, one that goes beyond the practical. Remedies against scurvy shaped the culture and identity of pirate life in ways we rarely consider. Think about the rituals of eating and drinking aboard a pirate ship. Food wasn't just nourishment, it was community. Men gathered around to share stews, to drink grog, to chew on whatever fresh supplies they could steal. In those moments, remedies became part of pirate folklore. Stories spread about how a certain fruit had brought a man back from the edge of death, how a strange tea brewed from island leaves had saved half a crew. Each success became a tale, and each tale became part of the collective memory of pirate brotherhood. This is where storytelling itself became a remedy. The sea was vast, lonely, and terrifying. Men needed hope as much as food. When a sailor began to show the first signs of scurvy, the others might remind him of stories of the last time they found citrus on a distant shore, of how a dying man once rose again after drinking bitter pine tea. These weren't just anecdotes. They were anchors holding men against despair. And in a way, these stories were as nourishing as the remedies themselves, because belief could push men to hold on long enough for the cure to arrive. But belief could also turn dark. Pirates were not immune to superstition, and when remedies failed, men sometimes blamed curses. Evil spirits, or betrayal within the crew, scurvy, invisible and mysterious, was fertile ground for fear. If a man died despite drinking citrus, whispers might spread that he had been cursed or that someone had sabotaged the remedy. In a lawless society, such suspicions could spark violence. There are accounts of pirates accusing shipmates of hoarding fruit, of deliberately spoiling barrels of food, even of poisoning the sick. Whether true or not, these accusations reveal how deeply remedies were tied, not just to health, but to trust. Imagine being on such a ship, the air thick with suspicion, every man eyeing the other, wondering if someone was secretly stealing the precious onions or squeezing extra juice into his own cup. Remedies were lifelines, and lifelines in short supply breed tension. It was a powder keg, and sometimes it exploded. Yet, for all the fear and mistrust, pirate crews also displayed moments of astonishing solidarity. When remedies worked, when men saw their shipmates rise again from weakness, it forged bonds as strong as chains. To survive scurvy together was to share a miracle. And these shared victories built the kind of loyalty that no gold could buy. A crew that believed it had beaten death once would fight with twice the fury in the next battle, convinced that fate was on their side. What makes the history of pirate remedies even more compelling is how they existed on the edge of science. To us, the logic is clear. Vitamin C prevents scurvy. But to them, the reasoning was mysterious. They connected remedies to patterns. When we eat citrus, men recover. When we drink certain teas, the bleeding slows. It was observational medicine at its rawest form. Pirates didn't care about the why, they cared about results. And that ruthless pragmatism may have been their greatest strength. Contrast this with the world of naval bureaucracy. In the Royal Navy, remedies had to pass through layers of command, debated, tested, delayed by politics and skepticism. For decades, countless sailors died, simply because those in power refused to believe that citrus fruit was the answer. Pirates, on the other hand, had no committees, no rules, no traditions holding them back. If a remedy worked once, they used it again. If it failed, they abandoned it. This brutal process of trial and error may not have been science in the modern sense, but it was science in action, observation, experiment, adaptation. Pirates, in their own rough way, were accidental scientists. But even their experiments had limits. Supplies were never guaranteed. Voyages stretched longer than expected. Storms scattered ships off course, and scurvy remained relentless. There's a chilling image in the journals of survivors, a ship limping into port with so few men left that it could barely be sailed. Corpses tossed overboard, weakened survivors too frail to lift a rope. The disease didn't just kill individuals. It broke entire crews, ended voyages, shattered dreams of fortune. Remedies could delay the inevitable, but when fate turned cruel, no amount of citrus or cabbage could save them. Still, there is something deeply human in their persistence. To keep chewing bitter pine needles, to sip foul-tasting vinegar, to guard barrels of sour cabbage like treasure it shows a stubborn refusal to surrender. Pirates may have been thieves, killers, and outlaws, but they were also men clinging to life in one of the harshest environments on Earth. Their remedies were not just medicine. They were acts of defiance against the ocean itself. And in this defiance, they left behind a legacy, not written in books, not recorded in scientific papers, but carved into memory and rumor. The very idea of mixing lime with rum, which later spread into navies and even into modern culture as a casual drink, began as a survival tactic on desperate ships. Today, we think of a lime wedge as garnish. Back then, it was salvation. How many people sipping a cocktail with lime realize that they're holding the same ingredient that once saved men from rotting alive on the high seas? But here's the most haunting thought. For every pirate who survived scurvy thanks to simple remedies, countless others died, never knowing the cure was so close. Men who wasted away within sight of islands rich with fruit they didn't dare approach. Men who had citrus in their hands but spoiled it before realizing its value. Men who gambled everything on gold, only to lose to a disease that a single onion could have stopped. It is this cruel irony that lingers, the silent echo of a truth learned too late. Picture a pirate ship anchored off a remote island. The men row ashore, not for treasure this time, but for survival. They scatter into the jungle, hacking through vines, searching for fruit, leaves, anything that looks edible. They climb trees for coconuts, crack them open, drink the sweet water, and chew the flesh. They strip bark from trees, experiment with roots, boil leaves into bitter brews. They are half explorers, half desperate scavengers. Every plant is a gamble will. It heal them or poison them. This was the reality of pirate remedies. Constant risk, constant improvisation. Some choices killed, others saved, but the line between them was razor thin. Now, imagine the relief when they stumbled on something that worked. A grove of limes, a patch of guava, a tree whose leaves locals said were good for the blood. The men who were too weak to stand suddenly tasted strength returning. The sickest among them rose from hammocks, shaky but alive. Those moments must have felt like divine intervention. And yet, it was nothing divine at all, just the simple, overlooked power of nature. Still, in the minds of pirates, it blurred into something mystical. How else could a sour fruit mend rotting gums in days? To them, it seemed like magic. These encounters also brought pirates into contact with indigenous peoples, whose knowledge of plants often far surpassed European understanding. A pirate crew might raid a village one week, then beg for remedies the next. Sometimes they forced healers to share their secrets. Other times they traded, offering steel or gunpowder in exchange for herbs and roots. Through these tense exchanges, remedies crossed oceans, carried by pirates who valued them as much as loot. It is a dark irony. Cultures exploited and brutalized by pirates nonetheless saved pirate lives with knowledge passed down for generations. And here lies another hidden truth. Piracy was not just about theft, but about exchange. Pirates were accidental messengers, spreading remedies between continents. A trick learned in the Caribbean might resurface on the coast of Africa. A tea borrowed from Native Americans might be brewed months later in a pirate camp near Madagascar. In the absence of books, the cure for scurvy traveled by word of mouth, by memory, by desperate men retelling what had saved them once before. Knowledge flowed like contraband, hidden in stories and habits. But scurvy did more than shape remedies. It shaped the very rhythm of pirate life. Unlike the disciplined navies that embarked on voyages lasting years, pirates often struck fast and returned to shore quickly. Part of this was strategy. Raids worked best in surprise bursts, but part of it was survival. They knew too well that months at sea without fresh supplies was courting disaster. This impatience, this hunger for quick raids and fast returns, may have been fueled not just by greed, but by fear of the slow death waiting in the ocean's emptiness. Scurvy was the clock that ticked behind every decision. And yet, pirates were gamblers by nature. Sometimes, when the prize was great enough, they pushed their luck, sailing farther than was wise, staying out longer than was safe. Those were the voyages where scurvy came roaring back. Men who had tasted survival once were dragged back into weakness, despair, flooding the decks. These swings between miraculous recovery and inevitable relapse created an atmosphere of constant tension. A pirate ship was never entirely free of scurvy's shadow. Still, remedies continued to evolve in strange ways. Some pirates swore by vinegar, drinking it daily as a cleanser. It burned their throats but seemed to bring relief. Perhaps not because of vitamin C, but because it improved appetite and digestion, slowing decline. Others relied on sprouted grains, noticing that if dampened barley or beans began to sprout, the green shoots offered something their bodies craved. They didn't know the science, but they felt the effects. These makeshift gardens, grown in damp corners of ships, were small lifelines in a floating prison. Even rituals of cooking became remedies. Pirates mixed whatever scraps of fresh food they had into communal stews, believing that variety, however small, kept sickness away. A single onion, diced and shared among 20 men, wasn't much, but it was a gesture of hope. They diluted rum with whatever sour juice they could find, turning every drink into a crude medicine. They chewed on leather straps boiled in broth, not because leather had nutrients, but because the act of chewing soothed pain and gave the illusion of nourishment. In such small acts, one sees both desperation and brilliance, the human instinct to cling to survival with whatever is at hand. And always, there was the psychological battle. Remedies did not just heal bodies, they fought despair. A dying man who believed he was drinking something magical might find strength to endure a little longer, long enough for a real cure to arrive. Pirates were masters of bluff, and sometimes the bluff extended to medicine. Captains pretended to have secret elixirs, mixing rum with herbs and presenting it as a cure, knowing that belief itself could give men courage. Was it deception? Perhaps, but in the brutal arithmetic of survival, a hopeful lie was sometimes as powerful as the truth. The irony is that pirates, who lived without science, often stumbled closer to solutions than the great powers of their age. Empires ignored evidence for decades, clinging to tradition while men died in droves. Pirates had no such luxury. Their world was immediate, merciless, and unrelenting. If something worked, they used it. If it failed, they discarded it. Their very lawlessness made them nimble in ways no empire could match. In that sense, piracy offers a hidden lesson. Survival often belongs not to the strongest, but to the most adaptable. But adaptability was no guarantee. Picture the end of a long voyage. Supplies gone, remedies exhausted. Men too weak to man the sails, the ship drifting aimlessly. The ocean indifferent, the sun burning overhead. In those final days, remedies ceased to matter. The disease consumed the crew, one by one, until the ship was silent, but for the creak of timbers. Many pirate vessels ended this way, never returning, their stories lost beneath the waves. Scattered bones on the ocean floor, never knowing that the cure they needed grew freely on countless shores nearby. And yet, the ones who survived carried their lessons forward. Survivors told tales in taverns, passed tips to other sailors, spread rumors about strange remedies. These whispers, repeated across years and oceans, planted seeds of knowledge that outlasted piracy itself. When the British Navy finally adopted citrus juice as standard, when science finally caught up, the ghosts of pirates were already there. Their crude remedies echoed in official policy. It is a strange legacy that outlaws, reviled and hunted, may have been among the first to prove what the world would eventually accept as truth. There is something poetic in the way Scurvy shaped the legend of pirates. We remember them for their battles, their flags, their treasure, yet the greater enemy was not cannon fire or royal fleets. It was a silent, invisible force, a hunger that stripped men of strength and dignity. And against that enemy, their true weapons were not swords or pistols, but limes, onions, and cabbages, simple, humble things. Imagine how absurd it must have seemed. A man could survive musket balls, duels, and storms, only to fall to the lack of something as ordinary as fruit. That absurdity haunted every voyage, every raid, every feast of stolen rum and roasted meat. Beneath the laughter and songs, the shadow of scurvy always lingered. But here is the twist. Pirates, for all their brutality, were also teachers. They proved that survival could come from places no one expected. They showed that lawless men, driven only by instinct and desperation, could stumble upon truths that empires ignored. They carried those truths across oceans, spreading remedies through whispers, stories, and stolen cargo. And in doing so, they became part of a chain that would one day change the world. When navies finally embraced citrus as law, when scurvy ceased to be the great killer of the seas, it was not only the triumph of science. It was also the echo of desperate pirates chewing bitter fruit on forgotten islands. Think about the irony. The same men history painted as villains may have saved more lives than they took, simply by surviving long enough to prove that citrus worked. The cure for scurvy was not hidden in a royal vault, not buried with treasure, but hanging from branches in plain sight. And it took the outlaws, not the kings, to grasp its value. Yet, scurvy was never just about medicine. It was about time. Every pirate ship knew it was racing against the clock. Every remedy bought a little more of it, but never enough. And this constant pressure shaped who they were. Pirates lived fast, fought fiercely, and seized fortune while they could, because they knew the ocean was patient and death was always waiting. In some sense, scurvy itself may have carved the pirate spirit, the urgency, the recklessness, the hunger for life before it slipped away. And here's the haunting part. Even after remedies became better known, even after the truth of citrus was undeniable, men still died of scurvy. Why? Because knowledge alone was never enough. Supplies spoiled, leaders ignored advice, greed outweighed wisdom. The cure was there, yet arrogance, neglect, or sheer bad luck kept it from saving lives. That is the cruelest lesson scurvy leaves us. Sometimes the answer to survival is simple, but simplicity is the hardest thing for humans to trust. So the story of pirates and scurvy is not just a tale of disease, it is a mirror. It shows us how humans confront the unknown through fear, through superstition, through experiment, and finally through discovery. It shows that survival belongs to those willing to try, to fail, to learn, and to try again. And it shows that even the most unlikely, figures criminals on the edges of society can play a role in the progress of humanity. Picture the final scene: a pirate ship, sails torn, men weary, anchoring off a tropical island. The crew drags themselves ashore, searching not for gold, not for glory, but for fruit. They find it bright, sour, stinging on the tongue. They eat, they drink, and within days, the ship that was a floating coffin begins to live again. The men laugh, sing, and prepare to sail once more. They don't know why it worked. They don't care. All they know is that they beat death, if only for a little while. And that little while is everything. That is the forgotten treasure of piracy. Not jewels or coins, but the knowledge, bought in blood and suffering, that survival sometimes rests on the simplest remedies: limes, cabbages, onions, things we take for granted today, but which once meant the difference between life and oblivion. So the next time you hear the clink of ice in a glass, the wedge of lime perched on the rim, remember that you are holding a fragment of history. A cure discovered not by scholars, but by desperate men on the edge of the world. A cure that turned rum into medicine, despair into hope, and pirates into accidental saviors. And maybe that is the truest lesson of all, that survival is not always about power or wealth or knowledge. Sometimes it is about listening, experimenting, and daring to trust the simplest answers. Pirates did not set out to cure scurvy, but in fighting for their lives, they showed the world a path forward. If you've stayed with me through this story, then you've glimpsed the hidden side of piracy, where the greatest battles were not against ships, but against the ocean itself. And if you want more untold tales from the Age of Sails, make sure to subscribe because the seas are still full of secrets.